Kathy, let's start with you in Calgary. You are opposed to spanking. You would, though, like to see the law changed, would you not?
I would. And I think we have to recognize that, when we know about child development, and we know a lot more now than we ever did before, we know that at birth their brains are only 23% developed. They have no self-regulation. And self-regulation is something that we learn throughout our life, and we learn it from our environment. It seems to me that because we do have lots of other tools that we can use, why would we use spanking that actually does not teach self-regulation?
Dave, would you disagree with that stand?
Well, I would agree with a great deal of that. The role of brain development as children, epigenetics of their environment as they mature is an important factor. However, appropriate discipline can be, and corporal punishment is one way, one other tool that many parents will use and should have in their toolbox. Doesn't mean they're going to use it all the time, nor should they. However, it's one tool that is available to them.
So, Dave, you like the law as it stands right now, the way criminal code recognizes corporal punishment?
The Supreme Court of Canada looked at Section 43 of the Criminal Code, the spanking laws it's known, and reviewed it in 2004, I believe it was, and said, no, it should stay the way it is. And I do concur with that. I believe that it's an appropriate way of doing things. It differentiates between child abuse and child discipline, and we do need to note that publicly right off the start, that a child abuse is not appropriate in any form at all, whether it's physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. That just simply is not a starter for anybody here and is completely inappropriate. However, child discipline is a different matter altogether, and parents need to have a wide variety of tools in their parenting toolbox in order to raise their children appropriately. Every child will react differently, and even in different situations, but parents should have a full range of tools if at all possible.
And that would include being able to spank a child?
Yes.
I guess the question I have to ask is, why would spanking even be necessary? If the parents are actually learning the different skills, then why would we even need that one? Our laws have changed to protect our children in many different ways. We put seatbelts on them in cars. We decided that smoking isn't a good idea around children. And if we look at ourselves as parents, our job is to keep them safe, mind, body, and spirit. And I cannot see how, when we spank a child, we're keeping them their spirits safe.
This is a good juncture to bring Mark Ammon in. Mark, Dave referenced the 2004 Supreme Court decision that upheld a parent's right to spank.
Yes.
As the law stands right now, what is legal, what is not, for those parents who maybe do not know and might be surprised to know?
And the Supreme Court in 2004 did add a lot of clarification here, because the section in the criminal code is fairly general. It refers to physical force so long as it is reasonable in the circumstances, which isn't really a good standard. So the Supreme Court's decision elaborates on this and provides some concrete guidance in relation to what is reasonable. So, for example, when they're talking about reasonable uses of force, it's inevitably an open hand, and it is applied in a corrective manner with no more force than is necessary for the purpose of correction. Things that are expressly not going to be falling under that section, according to the court, would be things like striking with an implement, like a belt or a stick or a ruler, striking a child's head, or using more force than is necessary, or applying corporal punishment in a manner that would be degrading or humiliating, a way that would add sort of psychiatric negative things in addition to the physical punishment, humiliating, embarrassing the child with that type of thing. Those fall on the line of not covered by Section 43. So those would not be acceptable uses of corporal punishment in Canada.
Kathy, does that not draw enough of a line for you?
I don't think so, because when you look at spanking, it's often, as parents, do we step back? Our child's done something we don't like. Are we stepping back and saying, oh, okay, I need to discipline this child, so I am going to spank them once? No. We usually respond from an emotional point of view, and so it's very easy to get, if we're not getting the response we think the child should show, it's very easy to keep going. And, children are very quick at, depending on their personalities, is their normal reaction fight, flight, or submit? And for spanking, if the child doesn't submit, it's very easy for that emotional response in the parent where they keep going. And so we're asking for self-regulation And yet parents are not always that good at self-regulation themselves.
So do you think parents are acting irrationally then?
I think it's easy to step out of that line. I don't say that all parents are, but when I'm emotionally charged, it's very hard to have a real easy give and take conversation. And so I think when we're dealing with children, children bring out a very deep emotion in us. And so it's hard to find that line.
So do you equate emotion with abuse then?
I think it can, yes.
One of the other things that actually came up prior to the Supreme Court judgment and some of the arguments was that the way spanking tends to be applied, this is obviously from the challenger's point of view, it works on sort of a continuum. So you wind up starting out perhaps with reasonable force, but as child behavior may change or perhaps escalate, parents may find themselves in a situation where to provide that type of punishment in a consistent fashion, they need to escalate the types of force that they're using. So one concern that was raised by the challengers in that case were that even if you start out applying it in a reasonable fashion, there's the potential to slip into unreasonable uses of force basically because of the nature of the way that type of corporal punishment is still going to be applied.
Dave, let's ask you about this. Where do you draw the line between punishment for bad behavior and when it becomes abusive?
Well, that is going to vary a little bit, but some general guidelines I would say. One, a young child, an infant under 12 months, 18 months of age, I agree with Kathy, the development is not there for them to understand why they're getting the spanking, and so that was completely inappropriate. Over an age of probably 8 to 10 years of age, and that's going to vary on the child, again, is probably more degrading to them than it is to be a useful disciplinary technique. And so there is that age range to start with. Certainly that any discipline needs to be taken care of in as least emotional possibility as possible. Parents need to be in control of that situation. The science is very clear that where a child is disciplined with 1 or 2 swats on the bum by an open hand, that in fact the results can be very positive. However, it should not be severe, so it shouldn't be a beating of any sort at all, nor should it be the only and the regular type of discipline that's used. That just simply becomes then that, well, every little thing is disciplined by spanking, and that's inappropriate as well. There needs to be a rationale. Children need to learn and understand, and parents need to understand perhaps why the child is in this emotional state as well. Is there something that's gone wrong at school or on the playground or in the household that's upsetting them? Those are all different factors that need to be taken into account, and that's very important when we as parents are dealing with our children. Many parents have said, that I've talked to over the years, have said, I put up with this all day. We tried to talk it through. We had timeouts. We had other forms of discipline, and nothing worked. And at the end of the day, a swat in the bum, and suddenly everything was back to normal again. And so there's a time and a place for it, but it's a swat in the bum is not the useful technique in every situation.
Okay, after the break. Kathy?
I would have to ask how that actually deals with the issue.
Okay, after the break, the ramifications of spanking. Does it have a lasting impact into adulthood? And tell us what you think. Should spanking be legal in Canada? Follow the contact links at albertaprimetime.com. We are back with our panel in 60 seconds.
Well, as long as it's not very severe, like child abuse, because I think you should be able to discipline your kids the way you want to.
It's a form of violence, so what are we teaching our kids if the only way we can deal with disciplinary issues is by hitting their bum? Doesn't make any sense.
There's more appropriate ways to discipline kids, but I mean, who am I to say that? I don't have any kids, so.
Give them a timeout or give them, some punishment, but violence is never the way with children.
Kids are becoming brats. Discipline is going out the window. I mean, I was spanked as a child. I think it was constructive.
So some thoughts there from Albertans on spanking and its role as a form of punishment for our children. Dave, let's start with you in Ottawa. Some say the long-term effects of spanking on children is what we need to be questioning. How can you be sure that spanking deemed reasonable might not be damaging in the long run?
Well, there have been a number of studies, and there are more and more studies going on right now, looking at the effect of corporal punishment, spanking on children. And basically, most of the credible studies that are being done at this point say that there is little difference between corporal punishment and some of the other forms of discipline in terms of long-term outcomes, whether it's on skills development, educational outcome, emotional stability, and so on. That whether it's a verbal reprimand, whether it's a timeout and go to your room for a period of time, or whether it's an appropriate conditional spanking on the bum, that the outcomes are basically the same between those different areas. And so the science is saying that there is no difference at this particular time. Of particular note on that issue, though, is that Sweden, since they've had anti-spanking laws since 1979, there's actually been a variety of studies followed within Sweden to say what are happening to the children that are now growing up into their teens and early 20s. That in fact, some of the studies are pointing towards a higher rate of youth violence, of inter-youth violence, as well as juvenile delinquency. Now, the full cause and effect isn't known at this time. However, I think it's a very interesting point to note that without that corporal punishment, at the same time, there has been a higher rate of juvenile delinquency and difficulties within the youth in Sweden at this point.
Kathy, do you agree with the science that Dave is referencing there?
Well, I would find different science that would take a different view, because we know that Health Canada, the Canadian Pediatric Society, the public health agencies are all saying that physical punishment isn't needed, that it does nothing to help the relationship. It actually, there are so many different ways to discipline a child that doesn't use physical punishment. And I think that's the big issue, is are we wanting to discipline and guide and teach our children, or are we trying to make them mind? And if I can't hit a child under 2 and I can't hit a child over 12, and yet it is just those in-between ages where I'm teaching self-regulation, how to deal with their emotions, what they need to do, well, if I use punishment then what skills are they going to have when they really need them later and they move out in the world?
Mark, is there enough of a deterrent if we're not relying on spanking at the end of the day? If it's not in the toolkit, as Dave says?
Yeah, it's a really challenging question, because, I mean, as a relative scientific layperson, I have seen competing studies cited, and some apparently point out positive effects of spanking, others point out negative effects. So ultimately, I suppose the question is, do we want to take that tool out of the toolbox? The reality is, I suppose, probably precautionary principles need to govern. And if we see that there is a potential for abuse here, maybe it is time to look at taking that out of the toolkit and seeing what happens. It's a very difficult line to draw, certainly, because some degree of physical force will probably always need to be legal in relation to dealing with the child. I mean, there are situations where we need to restrain a child to prevent them from hurting themselves or others, or, to escort them from an area where they're causing trouble, for example. Those do need to be legal. That's part of parenting. To take spanking out of that toolkit, again, it seems like it's hard to find a scientific consensus there. But if the law waits for scientific consensus to come to a conclusion, ultimately nothing will be done. And I think that's why a lot of attention is being paid to groups like the Canadian Pediatric Society and the Royal Societies in Britain, who have come out favoring a ban based on their review of the evidence.
Dave, if we take it out, if we remove spanking, we say you're no longer, as a parent, able to do that. Do you feel a parent has enough protection?
Absolutely not. In fact, New Zealand, just within the last couple of years, has gone down this road and has an anti-spanking law now in place. And there are cases on the courts and individuals that have been taken to court by the state, by individuals that have seen somebody touching, trying to take their child into harm, or allegedly have struck their children. They call it smacking in New Zealand. And so their family has been destroyed, basically, because of allegations where a child has been removed from a household, and up until that point, they were a very healthy, wholesome family. And so I think, as has been alluded to, the precautionary factor, do we want to go down that route of having a nanny state that's looking over everybody's backyard fences? Do we want to have something that is going to destroy my family because of something I've allegedly done without any proof? And I think that's a very scary option that I personally don't want to go through that door at all.
Kathy,
So can we not have guidelines? Can we not, as part of Section 43, say what is acceptable and what isn't? You know, we have a young family out in Fredericton right now coming up in front of the courts for stepping over the line. You know, and he's convinced that he didn't step over the line, and yet there's lots of witnesses that say he did. So we already have the law that says he can spank, but we need to say, well, yes, but there needs to be guidelines, and those guidelines need to be very clear as to what is spanking, what is physical abuse. Yes, you grab a 4-year-old off the middle of the street. You don't ask them how they feel about it, you know, when you pull them out from traffic. That's common sense. But we also know that parents don't change their attitudes unless there's some incentive to do that. And so that's what this law would do. We're not trying to make criminals out of everyone, but we are saying there is information, there are courses, we can learn it. And let's protect our children, mind, body, and spirit.
Everyone, an engaging discussion. I'm afraid I'm being told we're out of time. Thank you kindly. That's Mark Ammon, Research Associate with the Health Law Institute at the University of Alberta. Kathy Pelly is a certified Canadian family educator with Attachment Parenting Canada. And in Ottawa, Dave Quist, Executive Director of the Institute of Family, Marriage and Family Canada.